Can you give this to Zaid? Don't touch the glass. Touch the only outside. Yeah, give that to Zaid. Yeah. Be careful there, okay? That's Zaid's.
It's glass.
I think it is, yeah. Okay.
Zaid.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi wahda wassalatu wassalam ala man la nabiyya ba'da amma ba'd. Today we go into the life of Shaykh al-Ghani al-Nabulusi rahmatullahi alayh, and we speak about, there's a lot of discussion about his books and that he wrote, but for me what's going to be really important is this idea of the time frame in which he lived, and on top of the time frame in which he used to live, also just his upbringing. Shaykh Sayyidi Abdal-Ghani bin Ismail bin Abdal-Ghani bin Ismail al-Nabulusi rahmatullahi alayh is from a city known as Nablus in present-day Palestine. And this is basically, he's from the region of Sham. And he's from the region of Sham, or his family's from the region of Sham. He actually, of Palestine, he actually is from outside of Damascus. And he was from a family of scholars. And the family of scholars were a family, and you'll see from the position of his father, that were not only well known, but they served the community. And this is sort of the first point I want to make, or first lesson we have to go into today. And this is namely for people who desire to be scholars, or are scholars, or are students of knowledge, that your ilm has to be of benefit to someone. Your ilm cannot live in a vacuum. Knowledge cannot live in a vacuum. The knowledge could benefit you, and that's great. Knowledge could benefit your family, and that's wonderful. The knowledge could benefit your community. That's excellent. The knowledge can benefit your students. That's amazing. But there has to be somewhere that the knowledge is able to be directed. Imagine that you have some sort of compartment, some sort of container. And as you're filling up that container, you have no, let's say water. You have nowhere to relieve that pressure. You have no pipe that will direct the water somewhere else. So you're filling it up. Eventually what's going to happen is that container is not going to be able to take much more. It could burst, it could collapse, it can overflow. But if you have a pipe that's able to come out somewhere else, then what happens is that water is being filled and it's directed to certain areas. Then now you're taking advantage. You're able to sort of irrigate everything around you, or feed everything around you. And that's how knowledge works. If knowledge is being taken in for the sake of only learning, and not for benefit. Now, look, every piece of knowledge you study will not go to everyone. There will be a certain percentage of knowledge that you learn that you will be able to pass on. And there'll be a certain percent of knowledge that you learn that you'll never pass on. That's just that's the nature of knowledge. However, what people should not make a mistake regarding is the idea that everything I learn, I have to teach. Or if I study, I have to teach in a certain way. See, people make this mistake. They say, oh, so-and-so gives talks, so I have to give talks. Who said that? So-and-so gives khutbah, so I have to do khutbahs. Who said that? Even when we graduate from madrasa, we always begin to recognize this teacher who's an alim will go begin to teach maktab. This teacher who's an alim is going to, and as a hafiz as well, is going to teach hifz. This teacher who's an alim is going to go give wa'ad and khutbah. This teacher who's an alim is going to go to the madrasa. This teacher who's an alim is going to go into higher studies and then research. This teacher who's an alim, or student who's an alim, is going to go and become, someone's going to train spiritually. This teacher who's an alim is going to go on jihad. This teacher is an alim. You don't have to do the same thing. People have this big misconception. Oh, I'm a scholar, so I have to go give these talks. I'm a scholar and I have to go and do these classes. No one said that. Many of the scholars where I lived in Zambia were just merchants, quote unquote, just merchants. But what happens when you have scholars who learn the actual fundamentals and then furthermore in depth of trade, and they become merchants. Now you have an honesty that begins to sweep and overwhelm what? The commerce of that region. So it's amazing if you become a scholar, and then you become someone who is you're teaching your knowledge of being a merchant by not teaching kitab al-buyu, although some people will do that, but you'll do it in action. You'll do it in action. And so the knowledge that a person gains has to be directed out in some capacity, but doesn't have to be in the traditional capacity. And people have this big misconception. When you look at mujahideen, many of the mujahideen that are out there, they people come back and say, I've gained so much knowledge when I was in jihad. Well, how did they gain knowledge in jihad? Because so many mujahideen are ulama. They may not be out there in the madaris, but they're doing jihad. And then they teach the people on the battlefield when they have their downtime. You see, and this isn't any capacity. But the idea is that the knowledge has to always be directed out. You cannot take in without directing it out. Now, the second lesson that I want all of us to be aware of is the fact that you need to know what type of alim or what type of scholar, what type of student knowledge, what type of person you're going to be. I'll give an example. When I came back from my studies, I wanted to start teaching in a madrasa, and I wanted to start teaching madrasa style classes. So I spoke to one of my teachers because some people had reached out to me and said, you just came back, the knowledge is sort of fresh. Can you teach us these books? And what was the result? One of my teachers responded back by saying, you're not really a person who can teach. He was very open in that regard, but you're not really a person who can teach. So, that's not going to be your area. And it hurt because I really wanted to teach and, maybe take students a couple days a week and begin to teach them. But the reality is that as I began to journey more through my life as an imam, I recognized that there's a lot of truth to what he was saying, that I wasn't on top of my class, and there were a lot of areas that I struggled in. And it's much more important for me to try to solidify that knowledge personally through whatever reading or classes I can take, and then give the community the basics in an area that I may be able to be more comfortable. There could be a person who there's a family of scholars. That family of scholars, every child is not going to teach or be the same type of person. But what's important is that child recognizes what type of person I will be. And so Shaykh al-Ghani, al-Nabulusi, rahmatullahi alayh, you saw immediately where he was going to be beneficial. He was a person of great spiritual growth. And not all scholars are people of spiritual growth. Some scholars need to teach the knowledge, like the sharia, the legal aspects, but will not teach the spiritual aspects. They will gain benefit being under others who are people of spirituality. In fact, if you look at even the founders of Darul Ulum Deoband, you'll find great luminaries like Maulana Qasim Nanotwi, rahmatullahi alayhi, and others who they were from the greatest ulama of this manhaj. But they were students spiritually of subhanallah, why am I forgetting his name right now? Subhanallah, I just slipped my mind all of a sudden. But their sheikh had completed Haji Imdadullah, rahmatullahi alayh. I kept wanting to say Haji Abdul Wahab Sahab. I know that's from Tabligh. So Haji Imdadullah, rahmatullahi alayh, he reached till Mishkatir. He didn't do Dora. So was he a scholar? I mean, people say definitely he was a person of depth. But technically speaking, he didn't graduate. I'm not holding that against anyone. I'm just saying, technically speaking, he didn't graduate. But the world benefited from him directly and from the branches that he connected out to all of his students, who then became luminaries in their fields and were able to harvest a lot of the benefit that he gave and then grow it and then distribute it. These individuals, Haji Imdadullah rahmatullahi alayh, he could have potentially completed his course, but he was to be the fountainhead of spiritual growth for the Deobandi manhaj. That was his role. That was his role. And if there was not a Haji Imdadullah rahmatullahi alayh, then, like, for example, when Maulana Qasim Nanoti rahmatullahi alayh wrote to Haji Imdadullah, when Haji Imdadullah Muhajir Makki, when he had done the hijrah to Makkah al-Mukarramah, I believe this is when he was in Makkah al-Mukarramah, he received a letter, saying that, alhamdulillah, the madrasa, that we've started the madrasa, meaning Deoband. And then he responded by saying, okay, you started the madrasa, so then what did we do? Meaning all this dua that we did, all this effort that we did, meaning Haji Imdadullah rahmatullahi behind the scenes, not only doing the tarbiyah, but making dua. What you're saying, you said the mother says, actually we, this whole line of benefit. So if he put himself firmly in the field, that would be most beneficial. And everyone has to sort of find what role they will have that will be beneficial. And some people will pair 2 things, 3 things together. But it's important for you to find that avenue of benefit for the community. And when someone benefits through a different avenue, we shouldn't be jealous and say, oh man, no. They're benefiting from that avenue. When I see the teachers, for example, at Darul Qasim, I'm not jealous. I mean, I am in many ways, but I'm not jealous like, oh, why am I not doing it? Because I'm not of that talent. I'm not of that caliber. When I hear people at Darul Salam, I'm not of that caliber. I can't benefit that way. But maybe I can benefit through some online programs or through some of the youth halaqat, etc. Maybe that's where Allah put me. So you have to look to see, where does Allah put you? And so when he studied, he actually, he traveled in his studies. And one of the beautiful things in his studies is that he actually was the child of, he's known for his vast knowledge, encyclopedic knowledge, but he was the son of a great scholar. And all of the trips that he took when he went to Egypt and he went to Iraq and he went to all these different places and went to the Hijaz, and he kept traveling. One of the things that we see, all the writing, over 200 books that he wrote, all of these things, what do we find in particular? We find al-Muhibbi, a famous biographer, wrote about him. About his grandfather, that he grew up under the protective wing of his father, the foremost sheikh and teacher of the shuyukh of Greater Syria. Then, over there, who was the reference point for all of them. When his father died, the functions and posts he once occupied were transferred into his hands. They included the teaching of the scholars belonging to the Shafi'i school at the Jumu'ah Masjid, named after the Darwish Baba, which had been established for his benefit and that of his progeny. Many books and furniture items belonging to his father became the inherited property of al-Ghani bin Ismail bin Ahmad, owned by him exclusively. He subsequently benefited from such assets for the rest of his life. He inherited from his father. Now, he inherited the actual physical items, but he inherited the legacy of his father's work. And this is going to be the next lesson. It's going to be a bit controversial, but please hear me out. I'm not saying everyone become a doctor. I'm not saying everyone become a teacher. Listen to what I have to say. When I was younger, I used to have a lot of thoughts. Now my thoughts have died down quite a bit. And this is why I'm a firm believer that you shouldn't speak too much. Now, at this age, after making all the mistakes I made, I'm a firm believer you shouldn't speak much when you're young. You should wait till you get older. Even ulama, when you return from overseas, be able to guard yourself and withstand the pressure and the excitement and the glamour of being that new scholar on the scene, that everyone gets you get invited to all these different retreats, etc. Fight against that pressure. Do yourself a favor. Sit under the company and the watchful eye and guardianship of a senior scholar and let yourself develop. A seed that has too much water will not grow, nor that which has too much sun, nor which is not deep enough within the soil. But if you have an expert gardener over you, that gardener will make sure that seed eventually grows and comes to fruition, becomes over time a means by which the world benefits. So, what was I saying? Okay, this is what I was saying. If your family has a legacy that it's known for, you don't need to fight against it. When I was younger, I was all about it. I was all about don't marry within your culture, and then don't do what your parents did in terms of, their occupation. You should do something else, and be your own person. And now I'm recognizing the wisdom behind all of these things. The wisdom behind all these things. I'm not saying you have to marry within your culture. You don't have to do whatever you want. Whatever works for you. But don't be the person who's going to go against the norm just for the sake of going against the norm, like I did. I had to be the anti-desi. I was the anti-desi of the world. I would not wear shalwar kameez or kurta pajama. I couldn't speak Urdu. I still can't speak Urdu. I couldn't. I could. Eventually, I couldn't speak English. And I let my Urdu. I wouldn't eat desi food. Now I'm like, why did I fight against that? There's so much benefit in my culture, and Islam accepts culture. But as you grow older, you begin to see it through maturity. So anyway, what happens is sometimes kids, they're like, oh, well, I don't want to be what my parents want me to be. I don't want to be what my parents want me to be. That's one thing I don't want. And why? For no other reason, because they're just being rebellious. So many ulama became great ulama because their parents were great ulama and their grandparents were great ulama. We know that Shaykh al-Ghani al-Nabulusi rahmatullahi alayhi, who passed away about 300 years ago, almost exactly 30 years ago, 298 years ago, he passes away. He was a great scholar of the Hanafi madhab. He also studied the Shafi'i madhab. He was also a great scholar of Aqidah. He was also a great scholar of spiritual sciences. He was also one of the great leading jurists within the Ottoman Empire. And he was an individual who authored so much. But at the same time, he continued by allowing those above him to mold him, including his parents. So sometimes your parents will give you advice that the rebellious individual will just go against for the sake of going against it. But others, if you just take a look back and see, why do my parents want me a doctor? Oh, now in hindsight, it makes sense because they were doctors and their parents were doctors and their parents were doctors. And you know what? We have this ability within our family to treat people well. It doesn't mean if someone wants to do something else, they can't. But I'm just saying is don't reject the advice just because everyone else did it within your family. Rather, look to see what's best for you, but sometimes allow the elders to speak to you. I was speaking to a pretty big mufti within our American community this past week. And I was asking him about his one of his children and asking whether or not one of his children would become a scholar. And he was telling me what his child is studying in the university. And he was mentioning in particular that if my child wants to become a scholar, I will let my child become a scholar. And it will make me very happy. But this has to be my child's decision. Now, what I like about this interaction with him was he gave the influence and environment for his child who did memorize the Quran, but then also allowed the child to make decisions that were pertinent to that person's life. And the child neither rebelled because there wasn't too much pressure, nor took the environment that the father provided and threw it out the window. Rather, the child benefited in the environment, became a person of tradition, even memorized Quran, but then felt that there may be a different path in life and may return to it part-time or full-time later. But the idea is don't just reject it just because, oh, my mom said it, my dad said it, I don't want to be that way. That's not the way we should be existing. The way we should exist is we should recognize that families sometimes have inclinations certain ways. You'll see a person's a hakim, a doctor, a traditional doctor. And the science of it, but also just some of the dispensations are inherited just through the family. And so it's very difficult sometimes to break away from that. So rather than rebel, know that you can give benefit through this. And Shaykh al-Ghani bin Ismail al-Nabulusi, what he did was he allowed himself to see the legacy of the family and then subsequently inherit from it. Now, the next lesson, actually, and there's a lot of lessons yet, so it's sort of going slow, but inshallah we'll be done shortly, is that the parents took responsibility for the tarbiyah of the child. They didn't merely take the child and throw the child in the direction of ulama. Rather, and I was mentioning the story of Mufti Taqi Uthmani, Mufti Rafi Uthmani yesterday or the day before. They weren't just, okay, go to your sheikh. Their father always spoke to the sheikh behind the scenes and sort of kept an eye on all of them. You have to be engaged in your child's tarbiyah. And when you are, and if done the right way, the child will want to benefit from you. And then the child, let's say, for example, let's say it's an ilm of Sharia. The child will take from you as much as you can give the child. Then, after that, what will happen is that then they will go out. And then they'll begin to study. When I look at Maulana Zakir Rahmatullah Alayhi in his Abiti, what you see is the way that he was taught by Maulana Yahya, is the way he was taught could not be emulated by anyone else. That father-son relationship that sometimes was very firm, at the same time was filled with love, though the love could have been hidden. That father-son relationship cannot be found any other way. It will only be found sort of through the way that the parent can give. And so in particular, if you're people who are studying, give your children your time and give your children from your knowledge, even if it's only 1 to 2 books. But you'll be able to have a watchful eye to correct the way they sit, for example, or the way they take notes, for example, or the way they look back to how they research in your own library, for example. And what that will do is, as you correct that and improve that, then what's going to happen is that over a period of time, over a period of time, that child, when she finally goes out to study with others, the foundational tarbiyah and that foundational experience and that foundational method by which they're going to study and research and learn and take notes, etc., will be will have been embodied within them, and they'll subsequently be able to go and help others, and and benefit from others. And that's the beauty of an individual being able to take advantage of their parents when they study, so on and so forth. Now, and this is what you see in Maulana Zakir in particular with his father, Maulana Yahya Khan Dahlawi rahmatullahi alayh. You see that the early education was really provided within the household, and then through the uncle, and then it began to branch out to others. Okay, let's continue. Now, the environment of Maulana Shaykh al-Ghani al-Nabulusi rahmatullahi alayh was a beautiful environment as well. He lived in the Ottoman Empire, and living in the Ottoman Empire, he lived in a time in the Ottoman Empire in which there was power and there was pride to be Muslim. And this is one of those things that, the empire eventually has its fall, and now the Ottoman Empire is coming to light, of the news, and of because of what happened in Turkey and the Hagia Sophia being reestablished as a church, and whatever. I'm not going to get into that conversation, but now people are sort of going back and seeing how the Ottomans do. Oh, some people don't realize that the Ottomans actually had they actually purchased this property in a contract. And so now people are going back and researching and seeing some of the ways of the Ottoman Empire. One of the things that we found in the Ottoman Empire was that they were, at least in their glory times, they were people of jihad, they were people of ilm, they're people of tasawwuf, they're people of da'wah, they were people of all branches of deen. The people of all branches of deen. And Shaykh Abdul Ghani al-Nabulusi, rahmatullahi alayhi, you find the same thing with him. He was a poet, he was a person of literature, he's a writer, he's a scholar. All those things you see within him because the environment encouraged that. Now what happens is our environments are becoming, and environment is a very frightening thing. Because even today, I was just thinking about my kids. It was actually like 2 or 3 hours ago. I was listening. My son had his graduation online. And so I was listening to some of the talks by the teachers. And I was just thinking about the environment that we provide for our children. I was really just sort of depressed with myself. Because what we do is that we let others raise our children. But the reality is, throughout history, everyone has always done that. Because it takes a village to raise a child. But now we have to see what type of village have we put our children in. And I'm not talking about the village on the corner of 35th and College Avenue. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the cyber village that we brought into their lives and the technology-based village that we brought in. that there will be, our children are living in villages, but these are virtual villages. In what virtual village did we put forth? We can't look at a child and say, why is my child not like that? Except that we have to take a step back and do some introspection. I have to do some introspection and see to myself, why is my child like A, B, and C, if there's something that I'm not happy with? Then I have to see, what did Sa'ad do? What village did he bring in to make A, B, and C occur? Did Sa'ad encourage this versus that? Maybe he didn't do it by his own tongue or actions, but he opened the gate of the virtual village into his household, and his child was raised by that village that everyone always says it takes a village to raise a child. But unfortunately, he chose the wrong village. He chose the .com village or the cyber village, and the cyber village can be dangerous. Or someone else can say, what did that family do that was great? Well, what they did was they stood up for the spirituality of their child, even if, sorry? Should I stop talking then? Okay. Even if it meant for a period of time being unpopular. What does that mean? My friends, they like to do A, B, and C. That's not the village I want my children. Because you know what? Children is very frightening. And today it hit really hard when I was listening to Maulana Muhammad Abbas Umar, Hafidhullah, and he was making dua at the end of graduation, and Mufti Azim spoke before that, and Mufti Azim had some stories as well that really, both speakers really like made me just think, man, I'm not raising my kids the way I want them to be raised, and it's really just laziness. Sometimes it's circumstance as well. When I was reading the life of Shaykh al-Ghani, rahmatullahi alayh, his father was busy. The parents are busy, but they allow, if the mother can't raise and the father can't raise a child because of time constraints, and it will happen, they allow the proper village to raise the child. If there has to be a virtual village, they will gauge the virtual village and put time constraints on it, for example, or put constraints of what can reach the child's heart. Then they will, on the times that are free, not allow, give time to their children, or take the children to environments that will be conducive to growth and not just environments that are conducive to to a person being stagnant. And it's the smallest things. It's the smallest things that often make this change. And so, just reading about his family, that we see that within the Ottoman Empire, that all schools of thought were taught. The Hanafi school of thought in particular was adhered to, and Shaykh Abdul Ghani and his father are both scholars of that school of thought, and particularly. They would be approached on areas that were sort of confusing to others. And Shaykh Abdul Ghani, he even then studied the Shafi'i fiqh because the region in which his family is from and in which he was in as well had a lot of members of the Shafi'i madhab as well. And so he wanted to be able to benefit them. I want to skip some of these things. But one thing I want to mention that comes up. Oh. Can you get me a book for me? Can you come over here? Go to the bookshelf there. Go one shelf lower. And all the way to the right. You see that orange book all the way to the right? Yeah, give me that book. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you very much. Okay. It's an excellent book. I think everyone should really think about getting. It's called The Perfect Family, Virtues of the Ahlul Bayt. And the reason why I mentioned Virtues of the Ahlul Bayt is because what's happened nowadays, is that we have a lot of people, there's a discussion recently about how people no longer give a lot of the Sunnis don't give that much what's what I'm looking for, emphasis on Ahlul Bayt. And there are some Sunni who become Shia because the Shia put a lot of emphasis on Ahlul Bayt. And then we do have from the Barelwi community, they put a lot of influence on Ahlul Bayt. Sometimes the Deobandi community does, sometimes it doesn't. Different communities are different, and not that anyone loves them less. But one of the things that we see is that Shaykh Abdul Ghani, rahmatullahi alayhi, he was a Sayyid. He was from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and um, um, there was an appreciation for this. And what often happens is that when we forget from where we came, we can't become great people because we've cut off a connection to the past. Anytime you cut off a connection to something that feeds you in the present, you can't grow. For example, just think of if you're watering plants and you cut off the water to the plants, you'll never grow the plants. If a child's in the womb of the mother and for some reason the placenta and then the umbilical cord is somehow cut off and vital nutrients don't get to the child will die. You can't cut off from the source. And I was just studying about Deoband recently, that the founders, that this is an Uthmani, this is Alawi, he is a Sayyid, he is a Faruqi, he is a Siddiqi. From these different followers, they're all from like the Khulafa and from the Prophet's life, and that wasn't something that they were embarrassed of. Nor did they worship the idea, but they weren't embarrassed of it. And so over here, you find that they definitely had an appreciation about where they came from. They didn't make the sole purpose of their lives. At the same time, they did not allow themselves to pretend like it wasn't important. And then finally, I want to just mention that along with his travels and his studies, he was someone who was very, very much involved in his spiritual development and the work of the tariqah. And everyone should definitely look. You don't have to have a sheikh, but you have to spiritually purify yourself. I don't know. Oh, okay. You don't have to have a sheikh, but you have to spiritually purify yourself. And this was something that he definitely did. He became a master of spirituality, and it doesn't have to be in a tariqah. Although I personally do recommend the idea, it doesn't have to be in a tariqah. But what does happen is that if you have sort of an orderly way by which you approach your studies, you will begin to flourish and grow. Similarly, if you have an orderly way by which you approach your workouts, you'll begin to find quote unquote gains, right? And if you have an orderly approach by which you by orderly method by which you approach your spirituality, you'll also see growth. Finally, he passed away on the 24th of Sha'ban in the year 1143 after Hijrah. He was at home and where the funeral prayer was held, and the people flocked there until there was no room within the house anymore for people to pray janazah over him. And then he was buried in the western part of the old city of Damascus. May Allah have mercy upon him, his family, and allow us to benefit from his works as we move forward. The introduction is very short. We'll just go through it tomorrow. Let's go ahead and put some time into some worship ourselves today. So the first thing that we've been doing the past couple of days has been we're going to pray 2 rak'ah. I'm going to request that you do that on your own at the end, just because inshallah, I'm confident that you'll do it. Maybe I'll just do it with you guys in a few moments. But I want to begin today because we spoke about the family of the Prophet. Let's do some salawat or durood on the Prophet. You can go ahead and do any type that you want and you're comfortable with. I'll do my own, but you can do any type that you want. If you don't know any complex type, or you're not sure which one to do, just say sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's sufficient. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد خاتم الأنبياء المرسلين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد إمام الأنبياء المرسلين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد أستاذ الأساتذة ومدرس المدرسين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد صاحب التقوى واليقين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to spend a few moments doing istighfar because we have not really done that much. You can do any istighfar. Astaghfirullah Rabbi min kulli dhanbin wa atubu ilayk. Astaghfirullah. Allahumma innaka afoon tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anni. Whatever istighfar you want to do, but spend a few moments just thinking about sin that we may have committed and then do istighfar for it. Astaghfirullah. Astaghfirullah. The next thing we do is we're going to do the takbirat that are sort of found in this time of the year, especially because it contains the takbir and tahmid and tahleel that the Prophet encouraged. So Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Lillahi alhamd. If you don't want to do that, you can just do Allahu Akbar as many times as you want, then Alhamdulillah as many times as you want, then La ilaha illallah as many times as you want. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, 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 Allah, La ilaha illallah, Allah. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to read some Quran. So you'd open your Quran up to whatever page that you had left off on, and then we're going to spend a few minutes reading Quran. And then let's recite Surah Al-Ikhlas 3 times. The reward of Surah Al-Ikhlas is 1/3 of the Quran. The hope is by reciting it 3 times, you get 1/3 of the reward 3 times, which is 1 full reward. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. The next we'll do one dua today that we didn't do yesterday, and that is a dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Sunan Abi Dawud, he mentions that whoever says raditu, so repeat after me, raditu billahi rabba wa bil islami dina wa bi Muhammadin sallallahu alaihi wasallam nabiyya, or in a narration, wa bi Muhammadin rasula. So whoever says this, wajabat lahul jannah, paradise will be mandatory upon that person. And some of the scholars mentioned you stay a certain time in the day. Regardless, alhamdulillah, we did it once. Inshallah, it'll become a habit for us in the morning, in the evening, at the very least, at least once. Okay, then we'll now make dua. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad wa sallam. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. اللهم اجعلنا من الصالحين، اللهم اجعلنا من الراشدين، اللهم اجعلنا من قائمين يا الله، اللهم اجعلنا من الصائمين، اللهم اجعلنا من أولياء الدين ومن أوليائك يا الله، اللهم اجعلنا من أصحاب جنة الفردوس بغير حساب، اللهم اجعلنا من الذين يجاهدون في سبيلك وينفقون في سبيلك، اللهم اجعلنا من الذين، اللهم اجعلنا من المؤمنين، اللهم اجعلنا من القانتين، اللهم اجعلنا من السابقين، اللهم اجعلنا من المقربين. Oh Allah, we ask you, Allah, to accept whatever little we've had offered, Ya Allah, and make us amongst those who push ourselves these days, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, my wife just mentioned that one person she knows just a couple days ago just sat down and read the entire Quran in one day, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, we hope for him, Ya Allah, to do any acts of worship, Ya Allah. Grant us consistency and strength, Ya Allah, in these 10 days, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, we ask, Ya Allah, that baby Fatima, Ya Allah, on the East Coast, daughter, brother, Dr. Ali Shafiq from our community, Ya Allah, who's moved to the East Coast. Oh Allah, she's a premature child, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, they've tried multiple times to remove the tube from her, Ya Allah, and they're going to do so again, Ya Allah, tomorrow. Oh Allah, let this be successful, Ya Allah. Let this child, Ya Allah, be able to be taken off of that tube, Ya Allah. Let this child be able to grow up healthy, Ya Allah, and grow up pious and pure, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, let this child grow up to be one of the representatives of your deen, Ya Allah, along with her siblings, Ya Allah, and her parents, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, oh Allah, they've suffered much, Ya Allah, in this process, Ya Allah, but they've been patient and content with your decree, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, grant them good news, Ya Allah, on this blessed day of Dhul-Hijjah, that tomorrow is a success, Ya Allah, and she's able to return home, Ya Allah. Oh Allah, oh Allah, we ask, Ya Allah, that those individuals, Ya Allah, we've made dua for the past few days, and those we have not made dua for, Ya Allah, that you accept them and bless them and forgive them and remove their ailments and illness and hardship, Ya Allah. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala khayri khalqi Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Okay, if you, please make sure you pray 2 rak'ah when you get offline. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.